The 1960s were a turning point for horror. The old Gothic traditions of monsters and castles were giving way to something darker, stranger, and far more personal. In this countdown, we're looking at 10 essential horror films of the 1960s, movies that defined the era, terrified audiences, and continue to cast their shadows today. Number 10. Black Sunday, 1960. Few films announced the arrival of a new horror master as boldly as Black Sunday. Mario Bava's directorial debut tells the story of Princess Asavajda, a witch condemned to death who returned centuries later to take revenge on the descendants of those who executed her. Barbara Steele, in a career-defining dual role, embodies both the vengeful witch and her innocent relative, cementing her as one of horror's greatest icons. What makes Black Sunday unforgettable is its style. Bava's mastery of black and white cinematography creates images that feel carved in shadow, swirling fog, ruined castles, and Steele's wide, hypnotic eyes. The opening sequence alone, with the spiked death mask hammered onto Ace's face, set a new standard for Gothic horror and pushed the limits of on-screen violence for its time. Though banned in several countries and heavily censored in others, the film's reputation only grew. Critics hailed its artistry, fans praised its brutality, and its influence can be seen everywhere, from Hammer's Gothic cycle to American International Pictures' rise in the 1960s. Black Sunday stands at the crossroads of old-world Gothic tradition and modern cinematic horror. It remains one of the most stylish, atmospheric, and important genre films of the decade. A film that not only launched Barbara Steele's reign as a horror queen, but also Mario Bava's legacy as one of the great architects of Italian horror. Number 9. Peeping Tom, 1960. Few films rattled audiences and critics as deeply as Peeping Tom. Directed by Michael Powell, it tells the story of Mark Lewis, a shy cameraman who harbors a dark obsession. He films women as he murders them, capturing the exact moment of terror on their faces. Played with chilling restraint by Karl-Heinz Böhm, Mark is both predator and tragic figure, forever warped by his father's cruel experiments in fear. The film is a sharp, unsettling look at voyeurism, long before the word became part of pop culture. Its use of the killer's camera as our point of view forces the audience to become complicit, watching the crimes unfold through the same lens Mark does. For 1960, this was shocking, far more than most moviegoers were ready for. When it premiered, Peeping Tom was reviled in the press, effectively ending Powell's celebrated career in Britain. But history has been kinder. Today, it's recognized as one of the most important horror films ever made, a work that anticipated both the slasher genre and cinema's obsession with the psychology of killers. Peeping Tom stands as a bold, controversial film that dared to stare directly into the act of watching, and made the audience realize that sometimes looking is the most dangerous thing of all. Number 8. Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Georges Franju's Eyes Without a Face is one of the most haunting films of its era, a lyrical nightmare that combines beauty, tragedy, and horror in equal measure. The story follows Dr. Génessier, played by Pierre Brasseur, a brilliant but obsessed surgeon determined to restore the face of his disfigured daughter, Christiane. Hidden behind a porcelain mask, Christiane drifts through the family's mansion like a ghost, her delicate presence both heartbreaking and eerie. What makes the film unforgettable is the way it balances dreamlike poetry with moments of shocking brutality. The surgical sequences, graphic for their time, were notorious, leaving audiences unsettled across Europe. Yet these moments are framed within a film that otherwise feels elegant and melancholic, as though horror were unfolding inside a tragic fairy tale. Edith Scobb's performance as Christiane is central. Barely speaking a word, she conveys immense sorrow and fragile humanity through her eyes and movement. Her masked figure has since become one of the most iconic images in world cinema, influencing filmmakers from Jesus Franco to John Carpenter. Though controversial in its release, Eyes Without a Face is now celebrated as a masterpiece of art horror. It's a reminder that horror can be graceful and horrifying all at once. A film that lingers not just for its shocks, but for its beauty. Number 7. Kwaidan, 1964. Few horror films look or feel like Masaki Kobayashi's Kwaidan. Running over 3 hours, it adapts 4 traditional Japanese ghost stories into a single anthology, each with its own tone, but tied together by breathtaking visuals. Instead of natural settings, Kobayashi built elaborate soundstage environments, painting skies, forests, and oceans by hand. The result isn't just a film, it's a moving piece of art, where every frame looks like it belongs in a museum. The stories themselves range from eerie whispers to outright tragedy. In The Woman of the Snow, a man spared by a ghostly spirit lives in fear of her return, his fate sealed by a single, broken promise. Hoichi the Earless tells of a blind musician haunted by samurai ghosts, leading to one of the most unsettling ritual sequences ever filmed. Even the quieter tales like Black Hair or In a Cup of Tea leave behind images that burrow into memory long after the credits roll. What separates Kwaidan from other anthology horror films is its style. Bold use of color, surreal backdrops, and Toru Takemitsu's experimental sound design create a dreamlike atmosphere that pulls viewers into a world halfway between nightmare and folklore. There are no cheap shocks here. The horror builds through silence, through suggestion, through the sense that these stories are being whispered across centuries. Though lengthy and demanding, Kwaidan has endured as a masterpiece of world cinema. It represents the idea that horror doesn't need to rush or rely on violence to make an impact. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing is a story told slowly, beautifully, and with images you can never quite forget. Number 6. Repulsion, 1965. Roman Polanski's Repulsion isn't just a horror film, it's one of the most chilling portraits of psychological breakdown ever put on screen. Released in 1965, it was Polanski's first English-language feature, and it remains one of his most unnerving works. At the center is Catherine Deneuve as Carol, a young Belgian woman living in London with her sister. When the sister leaves on holiday, Carol is left alone in their apartment, and her fragile state of mind quickly unravels. What begins as subtle unease builds into full paranoia, with Carol hallucinating cracks splitting through the walls, strange noises echoing in the silence, and spectral hands reaching from the shadows to grab her. Deneuve delivers a performance that is both restrained and devastating. With very little dialogue, she conveys Carol's descent entirely through her body language and expressions, shifting from quiet, detached beauty to a figure of absolute terror. It's the kind of role that became career-defining, and she anchors the film with a haunting sense of vulnerability. Polanski amplifies the tension with innovative camera work and sound design. Everyday spaces become warped and threatening, the apartment itself almost alive, reflecting Carol's disintegrating mind. Simple shots of rotting food or unwashed dishes become grotesque, and the claustrophobic setting traps both Carol and the audience inside her nightmare. Upon release, Repulsion shocked audiences with its bold treatment of sexual repression, isolation, and madness. Some critics were horrified by its subject matter, but it has since been recognized as a landmark of psychological horror. It shows that true terror doesn't always come from monsters or killers. Number 5. Carnival of Souls, 1962. Few films embody the term cult classic as perfectly as Carnival of Souls. Released in 1962 and made on a shoestring budget by industrial filmmaker Herc Harvey, it tells the story of Mary Henry, a young woman who survives a car accident only to find herself haunted by strange visions and pulled toward an abandoned carnival. Candice Hilligoss stars as Mary, and her performance captures both strength and alienation. She's never quite at ease in the world around her. Her detached presence makes it unclear whether she's really alive or simply drifting in some strange limbo. That ambiguity gives the film its haunting power. The imagery in Carnival of Souls is unforgettable. The pale-faced man who stalks Mary appears without warning, staring through windows and emerging from the shadows. The desolate carnival itself, with its echoing dance halls and broken rides, becomes a perfect metaphor for death. Empty, silent, yet filled with echoes of life. Harvey's background in industrial films shows in the way he frames locations. giving ordinary spaces a stark, otherworldly quality. The film's organ-heavy score, often dissonant and overwhelming, adds to the surreal atmosphere. Combined with its low-budget grit, it feels more like a nightmare than a traditional narrative, closer to the dream logic of later directors like David Lynch than to the polished studio horror of its time. Ignored on release and dismissed as an oddity, Carnival of Souls grew in reputation thanks to late-night TV broadcasts and eventually the VHS era. It remains one of the most influential independent horror films ever made, a ghost story, a character study, and a surreal journey into the borderland between life and death. Number 4. The Haunting, 1963. Robert Wise's The Haunting is often hailed as the definitive haunted house movie, not because of what it shows, but because of what it refuses to show. Adapted from Shirley Jackson's classic novel The Haunting of Hill House, it follows a group of people invited to stay in a sprawling, cursed mansion to study its supposed supernatural activity. But as the walls groan and doors buckle, the real horror comes from the fragility of the human mind. Julie Harris delivers one of her greatest performances as Eleanor, a lonely, deeply vulnerable woman who joins the experiment in search of belonging. Harris plays her with such raw intensity that Eleanor's descent feels both heartbreaking and terrifying. Claire Bloom adds complexity as Theo, Eleanor's confident and mysterious counterpart, while Richard Johnson anchors the story as Dr. Markway, the investigator leading the study. Wise, who had cut his teeth as an editor on Citizen Kane and as a director of films like West Side Story, brings technical brilliance to the material. Shooting in black and white cinemascope, he uses extreme angles, distorted lenses, and experimental sound design to make Hill House feel alive. Doors breathe, walls stretch, and thunderous banging fills the halls. Yet the monsters remain unseen, leaving the audience to imagine what Eleanor believes is closing in around her. At a time when horror often leaned on creatures and gore, Wise created something terrifying out of silence, shadows, and suggestion. It's a film that continues to influence everything from modern ghost stories to psychological thrillers. Hill House isn't just haunted. It consumes the fears and desires of those inside, leaving us with one of the most chilling depictions of loneliness and madness ever captured on film. Number 3. Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby is a landmark of psychological horror, blending paranoia, isolation, and the uncanny terror of pregnancy into one of the most unsettling films of its era. Adapted from Ira Levin's best-selling novel, it begins innocently enough. Young couple Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse move into the Bramford, a historic New York apartment building with a shadowy reputation. Their new neighbors, the eccentric Roman and Minnie Castevet, seem overbearing but harmless, until Rosemary becomes pregnant, and her world begins to unravel. Mia Farrow gives a career-defining performance as Rosemary, capturing both the fragile hope of impending motherhood and the suffocating dread of losing control over her own body. Her vulnerability is amplified by Polanski's claustrophobic framing, keeping her trapped within cramped rooms and intrusive conversations. John Cassavetes plays Guy with chilling subtlety, a struggling actor whose ambition makes him disturbingly complicit in the sinister events unfolding. And Ruth Gordon, who won an Academy Award for her performance, steals scenes as Minnie Castevet, at once comical, nosy, and deeply unsettling. Polanski's direction is masterclass in restraint. Much like Robert Wise's The Haunting, the horror in Rosemary's Baby lies not in what is seen, but in what is suggested. Strange dreams, whispered conspiracies, and ominous medical advice create a suffocating sense of dread. The audience, like Rosemary, is left questioning what is real and what might be the product of stress, isolation, or madness. By the time the truth reveals itself in the infamous climax, the sense of betrayal and inevitability is devastating. Released in 1968, the film shocked audiences with its blend of satanic horror and social commentary. At its core, Rosemary's Baby is a story about control, over women's bodies, over personal freedom, and over the delicate line between faith and fear. Polanski's meticulous craft, combined with Farrow's haunting vulnerability, ensures that the film remains as powerful today as it was upon release. Rosemary's Baby isn't just a horror classic. It's a cultural touchstone that redefined what the genre could be. It proved that terror didn't need monsters or gore. Sometimes the most frightening thing of all is not being believed, even as the walls close in. Number 2, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead didn't just terrify audiences in 1968. It reshaped the entire landscape of horror cinema. Shot on a shoestring budget in rural Pennsylvania, this black-and-white nightmare introduced the modern zombie to the world, blending raw social commentary with relentless dread. What began as a small independent project became a cultural earthquake that still shakes the genre decades later. The story unfolds with chilling simplicity. A brother and sister visiting a cemetery are suddenly attacked by strange, shambling figures. Barbara, the sister, flees to a nearby farmhouse, where she and a handful of strangers barricade themselves inside. As night falls, the house becomes a fortress under siege, with the group torn apart not only by the horde outside, but by fear, distrust, and clashing personalities within. Dwayne Jones, as Ben, delivers a groundbreaking performance. One of the first times a black actor led a horror film without his race being explicitly addressed, making his quiet strength and intelligence all the more striking. Judith O'Dea's Barbara embodies shock and despair, while Carl Hardman's Harry Cooper adds combustible tension as a man whose selfishness threatens the fragile unity of the group. Romero wrings suspense from every creaking floorboard and shadowed window, balancing moments of silence with sudden shocking bursts of violence. Beyond the scares, Night of the Living Dead captured the turbulence of its time. Released in the shadow of the civil rights movement, political assassinations, and the Vietnam War, the film's bleak tone and devastating ending mirrored the anxieties of a world on edge. Romero used horror to hold up a mirror, forcing audiences to confront both the monsters outside and the divisions within society. Its influence cannot be overstated. The film birthed the zombie genre as we know it, inspiring countless sequels, remakes, and imitators. Yet no amount of gore or spectacle in later films has quite matched the stark, claustrophobic terror of Romero's original. With its grainy black-and-white photography and unflinching nihilism, Night of the Living Dead remains one of the most powerful horror films ever made. It is more than just a scary movie. It's a turning point, a cinematic revolution that proved independent filmmakers could change the face of the genre forever. The dead may walk, but it's the living, with their fear, selfishness, and fragility, who deliver the most chilling blows. Number 1, Psycho, 1960. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho isn't just a horror classic, it's one of the most important films in the history of cinema. With this single movie, Hitchcock shattered audience expectations, reinvented the thriller, and helped define modern horror as we know it. Released in 1960, it arrived at the dawn of a new decade, one that would see the genre grow darker, bolder, and more psychological. Psycho was the spark that lit that fire. The film begins deceptively as a crime story. Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, is a secretary who impulsively steals $40,000 and goes on the run. Exhausted, she checks into the Bates Motel, where she encounters the shy and soft-spoken proprietor, Norman Bates. Anthony Perkins' performance is unforgettable, boyish charm masking a tortured soul. What follows is a film that constantly upends expectations, most famously in the shocking shower sequence that left audiences stunned and terrified. Janet Leigh's turn as Marion was groundbreaking, not only for her intensity, but also because Hitchcock kills off his apparent star halfway through the film, a move almost unthinkable at the time. Perkins delivers a masterclass in nuance, creating a character who is both sympathetic and deeply unsettling. Vera Miles and John Gavin add grit as Marion's sister and boyfriend, desperate to uncover what happened, while Martin Balsam's detective provides one of the film's most suspenseful moments. Hitchcock's craft is at its peak here. Working with a modest budget, he used stark black and white cinematography, rapid editing, and Bernard Herrmann's iconic shrieking string score to create an atmosphere of unrelenting tension. The shower scene alone, with its 70 camera setups and razor-sharp cuts, changed the language of film editing forever. Yet beyond technique, Hitchcock tapped into primal fears: guilt, voyeurism, and the terror of hidden secrets lurking beneath ordinary lives. Psycho also broke barriers in how films were released and consumed. Hitchcock insisted that theaters not allow late admissions, forcing audiences to experience the story from the beginning. This bold marketing strategy turned Psycho into an event, one that drew massive crowds and helped make it one of the most profitable films of its era. Psycho earns its place not just for its scares, but for its enduring influence. It paved the way for the slasher genre, inspired generations of filmmakers, and proved that horror could be both artistically daring and commercially successful. More than 6 decades later, the shadow of the Bates Motel still looms large. And as Norman Bates once said, "We all go a little mad sometimes." Honorable mentions. Of course, the 1960s had plenty more horror worth remembering. The Innocents, 1961, delivered one of the most elegant ghost stories ever put on film. Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, 1964, gave a southern Gothic melodrama with Bette Davis at her most intense, and Hitchcock's The Birds, 1963, turned nature itself into a force of terror. Those were 10 of the most essential horror films of the 1960s, a decade that proved fear could be as much about the mind as the monster. Together, these films showed just how varied and influential the decade really was. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this trip through the 1960s, stay tuned as we keep moving forward through horror history one decade at a time. And as always, be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.